Terraria has 4 classes and one of them is clearly the main class, which is melee. It's such an iconic class that when you think of Terraria weapons, you probably think of the Knight's Edge and Terrorblade first. But even though it has such a high status as being the main class of Terraria while having some of the highest quantity of different weapons and different subclasses, it still suffers from the seemingly trivial problem of being too powerful. Melee or tank classes in most video games have incredible defense, but in trade for their defense they lose their speed, range, and sometimes damage. Absolutely none of this is true for melee. Melee versus all the other classes in the game suffers from none of these problems, except in the start where its range isn't the greatest. But trust me, post-boss it's totally fine, especially if you get a Star Fury or more than likely an enchanted sword during the time. What this means is that melee throughout the entire game will continuously have the highest defense and highest defense accessories, though 9 times out of 10 they won't actually be close range enough to benefit from it, which destroys the purpose of having high defense in the first place and makes it pointless. Without the downside of having less range or dealing way less damage from a range, the high defense makes no sense, and put on any other class like ranger or mage would pretty much help them as much as it does with melee, and there's no incentive to try to use this defense to your advantage at times. Even though true melee weapons do way higher DPS than magical melee weapons that shoot projectile, the heightened DPS of true melee weapons isn't strong enough to convince most people to use their defense or try more riskier strategies, since they have a bit less of a reward than they should. What also pains me about this unnecessary defense is that there was a possibility of having true melee / projectile-less melee weapon accessories that could make true melee stronger and the player faster, making it more possible and making more of an incentive to use their super high defense in a way that actually makes sense. But nope, melee post-boss will always have its insane advantages but none of the disadvantages that balancing a normal game would have. I think I talked a bit about this in my video about why you should try true melee, but I'll talk about it again just in case you didn't see that video. Melee in Terraria isn't really melee at all, as it plays more like a mage that takes no mana. They could have simply made shooting magical projectiles something that costs mana, which would have made the projectile thing fine as a subclass, but no, it doesn't make too much sense. So instead, we'll give a majority of hard-won melee weapons powerful projectiles that make whoever's playing forget that they even chose melee in the first place. Even from the start of hard mode, you can get high-range melee weapons like, these are all pre-boss hard mode weapons by the way. The Shadow Flame Knife drops from the Goblin Sorcerer. The Dao Pow, the Ice Sickle, and Frostband drop from Ice Mimics. The Flying Knife, the Chain Guillotines drops from a Mimic or Bat I think, and the Banana Rings which drop from Clowns. And also there are a few more than these, but you get my point already. This sort of makes such class redundant in a way, as 3 of the classes are majorly projectile based and only one of them is really different, since I'd say that Summoner is more melee than actual melee. Since to use whips, you have to get close, which is sad because Summoner has the lowest defense and most of the class is just letting your little minions do things for you. So with all these problems that I've listed here about how melee has too many range projectiles, no downsides after pre-boss, and high defense for no good reason, and the fact that you'll still play and fight similarly to if you chose mage or ranger, then how can we fix it to be a wholly unique class? I think it's simple. Firstly, we change all throwable melee weapons into ranged ones. This is for obvious reasons, since by no stretch of the word melee can those be considered in any way. Then we can make magic-based projectiles weaker and cost mana, which would make playing as a melee user more skill-based and interesting, as it could also be about managing your mana correctly, or using correct accessories to shoot more projectiles if you want to focus on that. Or you could just try to maximize your damage but still stick with close range. Alternatively, we could just remove all projectiles that all melee weapons have entirely, though I believe that that is less interesting than if they were just nerfed and as an option still in the game. Though I don't find the melee class itself boring like a ranger because of the incredible variety and subclass potential, I still feel like my enjoyment of the class has been hurt because of the fact that melee in the end plays the exact same as everyone except Summoner. It just happens to have the highest defense and some of the coolest and most iconic weapons in all of Terraria, while having an unbalanced amount of power in comparison to everyone else, with none of the downsides that should come from just the class's namesake alone. Subscribe for more videos about Terraria, PvZ, and reviews. I've been Alexander, and this is my stance on melee class.